In this section, we're going to be talking about assessment in the 21st century. In many ways, there's nothing new about assessment. Teachers have always tested. Auditions are a way of life for musicians. Grades and standardized tests are accepted entrance requirements for colleges. Teachers have always been evaluated. What is new is that teachers now need to demonstrate their effectiveness by showing data that the students they teach are growing. School principals and superintendents are also being held to the same standard. In this section of the class, we'll be taking a look at assessment with this need to show growth going in the back of our minds. So we'll be looking at issues in assessment. We'll be talking a bit about how to build a comprehensive assessment plan to assess student growth, and then we'll give some thought to the student learning objective process. So, first issue. The first issue is that assessment needs to be valid, it needs to be reliable, it needs to be fair, and it needs to be doable. There's nothing new about these issues. Validity refers to the likelihood that a test will actually evaluate or assess knowledge, the knowledge that it's supposed to assess. The reliability refers to whether or not it refers to the idea that if one takes the test multiple times, one will score approximately the same on the test given no new knowledge has been acquired in between. Or if two evaluators were using the same test, they would evaluate the same slice of behavior in the same ways. Also, you have to ask, is it fair? A test is not fair if it's testing things that have never been taught or if it's culturally biased in some way. And then also, is it doable? Can we just do the test within the limited time that we have with our students and with the numbers of students that some of us need to teach? So these issues need to pervade everything we do and they color all our decisions, as they should. We also need to think about how our data will be used. There are plenty of low-stakes ways that data can be used that just provide information for the teacher and for the student. For the teacher, it helps us decide how to pace our instruction, how to differentiate instruction, and it helps us make day-to-day decisions about what the next step is. For the learner, it just gives them information about what to work on. I know I need to practice this, I need to study that. For the teacher, the attitude that one takes is just very matter-of-fact and non-consequential and non-judgmental. It just is. This is where we're at. And for the student, if it's low-stakes information, the student can handle this. They're not defensive. They don't necessarily become competitive about it. In other words, it's information. We are data gathering animals. We almost can't help ourselves. We always are evaluating and assessing our environment. And what happens in schools just becomes a part of this same process. But there are also high stakes uses of assessment. For example, assessment is used to provide information with respect to admission to programs, ensembles, selection for valued membership I'm thinking about all states and district festivals and such. The information becomes value laden. There is a level of good or bad associated with these types of assessments, and they foster a sense of competition, and this kind of data is also used to prescribe grades. So data that's informative is one thing. Data that is telling me something about how good or not good I am at something can create different attitudes. It can be affirming or disappointing, can be highly motivating or rather discouraging, and an individual can be very excited about grades and learning and so on, and it can just stress them out. So high stakes information or high stakes assessment is one thing, low stakes is another, and we need to balance this out. There is an emphasis on developing what are known as student learning objectives. These are objectives that are clearly defined, and these are areas around which assessment systems can be built. To create a student learning objective, one needs to start with a big idea, and you may have several of these going on in your class. Start with a big idea. These are things like tempo and rhythm, or intonation and tone quality, or dynamics and balance, or attributes of singing and playing a particular instrument, and so on down the list. But the idea here is start with just one big idea. Intonation and tone quality is an issue that you may choose to emphasize in your ensemble or class, regardless of what kind of class it is. And if that's the case, one needs to emphasize that in every rehearsal and every lesson, and have supporting materials around the room bringing up that particular idea. Around that particular big idea, and there can be several big ideas going on in a class, but if one is going to develop a student learning objective and actually assess growth on that particular objective, one needs the clarity of a big idea. And then one creates an ambitious but attainable objective around that one big idea. Once you have the one big idea, you can build smaller goals around that. Now, how to begin? Begin with an image or a vision of an accomplished learner. This is an idea that Bob Duke emphasizes in his book, Intelligent Music Teaching. To start an assessment program, start by envisioning what an accomplished learner looks like, what they sound like, how they think, how they talk. Put all those things together to understand what excellence is in a particular area. I have a friend who teaches a class on assessment, and she actually bakes chocolate chip cookies for her class on the day that she talks about assessment and developing a vision of excellence. She, of course, assumes that her chocolate chip cookies are the best cookies ever made. She brings them into her class, and they slowly savor each bite, thinking about all the elements of the chocolate qualities, the texture of the cookie, the aroma that it might have, the balance of ingredients, the crunch, and so on. And from there, she develops a rubric of what excellence is. And then they define really fantastic, excellent elements of those particular, or excellent attributes of those particular features, elements that she's defined, down to not so good. It's one way of approaching excellence, but without that vision of an accomplished learner in mind, it's pretty hard to measure growth and to know where you're going. I personally find it very helpful to take a look at the new Bloom's taxonomy and to think about the cognitive process dimensions and the knowledge dimensions involved in learning. I find it helpful to think about what it is that one needs to remember, what one needs to understand, apply, analyze, evaluate, and create. And I like to use the different verbs that have been suggested by the authors of the New Bloom's Taxonomy and others who have jumped in jumped in to offer their explanations. The lists you see here include items that can be found in the author's description of the new taxonomy, and I've added a few that I think are relevant to music. I'm sure you could add more, and I'd be interested in your suggestions. But not only does one need to go across the cognitive process dimension, but I think it's exceedingly helpful to go down the knowledge dimensions. There are factual things that people need to know, but there are also there's conceptual knowledge and lots of things that a person needs to be able to do at different levels of cognitive processes. And then there are metacognitive skills that run through all of the different cognitive process dimensions. So I find that thinking that way really helps to develop a clean level or a clean vision of accomplishment. This, in some ways, might be the best contribution that the new taxonomy has to offer. If you're building a student learning objective, you'll want to create different levels of accomplishment for students. One needs to establish a baseline level of knowledge and skill based upon various sources of information. And from that baseline, you'll want to show growth. So you may want to establish a level 1 where there's absolutely no evidence of knowledge or procedure. That would vary considerably from school to school. It might be that you're dealing with an advanced class where students wouldn't even be admitted without some more sophisticated levels of knowledge. So it's important that you define what level 1 actually is. Level 2 refers to perhaps, again, this is something I just made up, basic levels of remembering and understanding, evident when prompted. In other words, the student can do things, but only when you, the teacher, are there helping them through it, or when they have a peer helping them through. When they're on their own, things become shakier. At level 3, the student can independently demonstrate fundamental knowledge and skill. This is different. Now they can do whatever it is that's being asked of them without prompting. And then at the 4th level, they can independently demonstrate some of the higher order thinking skills and doing skills. They're able to analyze, evaluate, or perhaps create work products on their own. And how much prompting are you going to give them? Some or none? And that's a big deal, because some places prompting is an accepted part of demonstration of knowledge, other times not. So to put together a student learning objective, you need a single big idea broken into attainable sub-goals, and one needs levels of accomplishment. And then one will use baseline knowledge, baseline assessments to classify students into these different levels. You may want to have 5 levels or 6 levels or 1.5 or 10 levels, whatever you want, but make sure that it's manageable. 4 just seems to be a fairly manageable collection of levels. But if you have a lot of kids with that are very needy, or you don't see kids very often, you may want to have more levels so that you can show growth if it's actually occurring. I want to be very clear that one establishes a baseline using multiple assessments. Taking one simple pretest and using it as a baseline will create a set of circumstances that may not show growth if it's actually occurred. Growth can happen in many different ways and can manifest itself in different ways and at different times. It's important that you have an assessment, that we have assessments that can measure that change. Even though it might be subtle, maybe it's happening down at the metacognitive level or the procedural level. One needs to assess all of those small changes, and the only way you're going to do it is by having multiple assessments. It's important to recognize that growth is different from attainment. As the word attainment is used in the SLO process, it refers to the score that one might attain on a particular test in time. That's different from growth. It's one part of growth. It could be an important indicator of growth, but it is not the only growth. Again, one needs to show attainment. By having multiple measures of student growth, one can establish where one is at the start of the class, in what level that student is at, and then show change over time. This means putting together a battery of assessments, and you have a lot of possibilities. Certainly, standardized tests of musical aptitude they're possible, but remember, it's just one measure that might be helpful in establishing a baseline, and it's not to be used to measure growth. Paper and pencil tests are fine. Observation within a class or small group setting is fine. Just taking data, looking at participation might be growth for some kids. It doesn't hurt to have video observation of a class or of students, and you can save the observation till later or have students help you with the collection of data. I know one teacher who puts a video camera on every rehearsal and uses that every night to observe what's going on in his rehearsals, or at least often. Having kids play, clap, or sing alone or with others is helpful. You can do this in small groups. Doing self-assessments is all part of the assessment system that one may have. Group assessments can be used. Really, the possibilities are endless. Many people like to use rubrics and checklists just for class exercises, for day-to-day self-assessment, as aspirational rubrics, whatever. And there's a great place to get these done quickly and efficiently. And there are great places, and two such places are Rubric Campus or Rubistar, very popular sites for developing rubrics, and there are hundreds that you can use as models. I like Rubric Campus because you can set up a class, and for a fee, of course, a small fee, you can set up a rubric, use it on an iPad, maybe a Chromebook, I don't know, and quickly assess a student's work using the rubric, and their score automatically falls into the roster that you set up earlier. You can't escape setting up rosters for your classes. You could also do something similar to this using a spreadsheet. You may want to set up a multiple choice test of some sort, but do give some thought to the theory about how to construct a multiple choice question. The ideas that you see on this slide are very commonly available on the internet or any other textbook on creating multiple choice questions. One needs to carefully plan the items and make sure that they align with the content that was taught and with that big idea that you're trying to teach. Resist the urge to throw in other questions. And you don't have to have a lot of multiple choice questions either, sometimes 3 or 5. Determine the level that you are going to be asking the question at. Is it going to be a fact, an application of a rule, solving a problem? Be thoughtful. Again, take a look at that taxonomy to make sure that you're touching at the appropriate cognitive process for the type of teaching you're trying to assess. One needs a STEM for each multiple choice question, a set of alternatives set of distractors. The sequence in which the questions are asked is important, and there's some long-term considerations. I know many teachers put together collections of cards, of index cards or flashcards, or now there are virtual flashcards that kids can use, and those are great ways of just reinforcing basic ideas and embedding those things into day-to-day life in the classroom so that the actual test is no big surprise. This is a great or an excellent article, I think, and if you're interested in learning more, try this article. So once one develops an assessment plan, it's important to embed those assessments into day-to-day teaching as much as possible. Sometimes there'll just be practice tests, but don't even call them tests. Just embed them into the daily activities and be creative about collecting data. Having talent shows, emulating TV shows, playing games, making things more like video games. Anything you can do is fun. Some class members have some great ideas for taking snapshots of kids as they hold up responses to questions. This is valid. It's as valid as any other data as long as it's part of a comprehensive assessment system. There is a tendency for teachers, and I've heard this many a time, to just rely on pre-test to post-test change only. This is of concern. There are some strengths. It absolutely helps diagnose areas of strength and weakness in students, and it helps teachers know where to focus instruction. But there are some problems, both statistical and conceptual. First of all, there might have been some growth occurring, but the test doesn't measure it. That is always a problem. Just contemplating the different ways in which a person can know some aspect of a subject area by thinking about the revised Bloom's taxonomy and all those squares that emerge gives you a sense of how growth can be occurring even though it's not measured. There's also a statistical phenomena called regression to the mean that occurs whenever a pretest and post-test is given. It simply means that those kids who scored lower tend to get a little bit higher no matter what, and those kids who scored higher, if the test is repeated, tend to get a little bit lower. It is a statistical phenomena that has been shown to be true over and over and over again. It's very important to take it into consideration. There are also methods of circumstances of test delivery that may be different. Kids may be taking the pretest at a fresh, when they're feeling fresh, and there might even be what's known as a John Bunyan effect or Paul Bunyan, effect at play. That's when you muster up, you just give it your all, and then it's time for the post-test, and just feeling tired and not that into it, and that can affect scores. The test may be too narrow and simply not detect growth, or there might be some sort of undetected bias within the test. Hard to know. It could be culturally unfair. It could be emphasizing certain types of teaching. You just don't know it. So it's a bad idea to rely solely on a pre-test to post-test assessment for a high-stakes decision. The best bet is to focus on multiple assessments to develop, to classify students into levels or stages of learning, and from there assess growth. And if one can do this, if one can develop a multiple assessments, develop and build a comprehensive assessment system, it will give you a reliable, valid, and fair measure of students' growth. It's very important to consider this. Thank you. More to come.